You have 3 seconds to decide. 3 seconds to choose between the fragile safety you've built and the beating heart of a stranger you've never met. This is the story of Susan Carter. And in 3 seconds, her invisible life ended and something far more dangerous began. Let me tell you about Susan. At 28, she had perfected the art of being a ghost. Her world was measured in shifts, tips, and the quiet breaths of her 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. Her day began at 5 a.m. at a bakery on 5th Street, where she kneaded dough with flour-dusted hands, breathing in the yeast and warmth that never quite masked her exhaustion. The owner, Mr. Petrov, paid her cash under the table, no questions asked. By 11, she was wiping down counters and slinging lattes at a downtown cafe called The Daily Grind, where college students complained about their course loads while she calculated whether she could afford both the electric bill and Chloe's field trip permission slip. And her nights, her precious nights, were spent at the Gilded Plate, a restaurant where a single appetizer cost more than her weekly grocery budget, where she moved between tables like a shadow, collecting the crumbs of other people's abundance. But she wasn't thinking of injustice as she tied her apron that rainy November evening. The fabric was worn thin at the edges, washed so many times it had gone from black to a sort of charcoal gray. She was thinking of her screaming feet, the way her arches had started to collapse from standing 14 hours a day. She was thinking of the rent due in 9 days, and whether Mrs. Henderson downstairs would watch Chloe for free one more time. She was thinking of the secret nursing school fund, a glass jar hidden behind the cereal boxes labeled someday in Chloe's careful 7-year-old handwriting. There was $243 in that jar. She needed $20,000. Her entire universe was Chloe. Every sore muscle, every forced smile at entitled customers, every moment of swallowed pride was a love letter to that little girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's absent legacy. That night, the energy in the Gilded Plate shifted. You know the feeling when someone powerful enters a room? The air itself seems to rearrange, molecules bending toward wealth and influence. Leo Thorne walked in, and the restaurant staff straightened their spines reflexively. A billionaire, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers. But it was his eyes that arrested attention, sharp and calculating, missing nothing. He moved with a confidence that was geological, ancient, immovable. The maître d' practically genuflected, the sommelier appeared with bottles that weren't on any menu, and Susan was assigned to his private dining room with one instruction from her manager, delivered in a whisper that smelled of cigarettes and desperation. Be a vase, see nothing, hear nothing, be nothing, serve and disappear. These men did not want to remember the help. The room was all dark wood, the kind that cost more per square foot than Susan made in a month. Warm lighting glowed from sconces that looked like they'd been transported from a European castle. Leo sat at the head of an oval table, his back to the wall, a man who understood the importance of sight lines. 3 other men were there, older, with hard eyes that had seen the making and breaking of fortunes. They wore suits that fit like second skins, watches that could pay off Susan's debts 3 times over. And then there was Donald, younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a smile that seemed glued on, too wide, too eager. He kept looking at the older men for approval, like a dog waiting for a treat. Something about him made Susan's skin crawl, though she couldn't have said why. Perhaps it was the way his eyes never quite met anyone else's. Perhaps it was how his hands trembled slightly when he poured himself water. Perhaps it was simply that prey recognizes a predator, even when the predator is disguised as something harmless. Susan poured the wine with the practiced grace of someone who had done it 1,000 times. A rich, blood-red Cabernet, the 1985 vintage, brought up from a cellar that probably cost more to maintain than her entire apartment building. The bottle was heavy in her hand, the label elegant with French script she couldn't read. She moved clockwise around the table, filling each glass to the precise level she'd been trained to achieve. Not too much, not too little. She was behind Leo's chair, finishing his pour, when Donald reached across the table. "The projections are right here, Leo," he said, his voice pitched with artificial enthusiasm, gesturing with his left hand toward a leather portfolio. But it was his right hand Susan saw, the one that passed, just for a millisecond, over the brim of Leo Thorne's full wine glass. His sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a pale wrist and something clutched between his fingers, a tiny crystal vial, no bigger than her pinky fingernail, tilted with practiced precision. A single, clear droplet fell, catching the light for just an instant before vanishing into the dark wine. The liquid absorbed it without a ripple, without a trace. No one else saw. They were all looking at the portfolio, at Donald's left hand, at the numbers on the page. Time shattered into 1,000 crystalline pieces. Her brain, exhausted from 3 jobs and 7 years of constant vigilance, suddenly operated with perfect clarity. He just poisoned him. In 30 seconds, maybe less, Leo Thorne will lift that glass. He will drink. He will compliment the vintage, because men like him always do. And he will die. Right here, in this room, while she refills the water glasses. Her eyes flew to Chloe's school photo, the one she kept in her apron pocket, bent at the corners from being touched too many times. Chloe's gap-toothed smile, her butterfly barrettes, her trust that Mama would always come home. Chloe needs a mother, not a martyr. Walk away. Be nothing. This isn't your world. These aren't your problems. You saw nothing. You know nothing. Pour the water. Finish your shift. Go home to your daughter. She looked at Leo Thorne, alive, breathing, discussing market shares. A human being with a heartbeat and probably someone waiting for him at home. Someone's son. Maybe someone's father. Definitely someone who would cease to exist if she remained invisible. 3 seconds. 3 seconds to choose between survival and conscience. 3 seconds to decide who she was going to be. Her body moved before her mind finished the calculation. As she stepped forward to clear a plate from the far end of the table, her elbow connected with Leo's water glass. It was clumsy, graceless, unmistakable. Ice-cold water cascaded directly into his lap, soaking through expensive wool, flooding across the table, dripping onto the Persian rug beneath. Gasps filled the room. The older men jerked backward. Donald's face went through a fascinating progression of emotions, shock, then understanding, then something that looked like rage before settling into manufactured concern. "Oh my God. Sir, I am so profoundly sorry," Susan cried, and her horror was genuine. Not at the spill, but at what she'd just done, at the choice she'd just made, at the door she'd just opened that could never be closed again. Leo shot to his feet, water streaming down his legs, dripping from his fingers. But he wasn't looking at his ruined suit, the fabric probably worth more than her car. He was looking at her. His gaze was a searchlight, pinning her in place, calculating, intelligent, seeing through skin and bone to something underneath. For a man who'd just been drenched, he was remarkably still. "It's fine," he said slowly, his voice a controlled baritone that carried the weight of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. Accidents happen, but the way he said it, the deliberate pause, the eye contact that lasted 2 seconds too long. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew this was no accident. When she returned with towels, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them, the atmosphere had changed. The conversation had stopped. The older men were watching Leo, who was watching the wine glass. When she reached to remove it, he held up one hand. "Leave the glass," he said, each word a command that allowed no debate. His eyes locked on hers again, and she saw it clearly now. Recognition, assessment, decision. He knew. The dinner continued, but it was performance now, everyone playing their parts. Susan moved through the motions in a fugue state, her body serving while her mind raced through consequences. Donald fell suddenly ill approximately 12 minutes after the spill, his face going pale, his excuses weak. He fled the restaurant without looking at anyone. The older men exchanged glances that Susan intercepted, coded communications she couldn't decipher but could feel the weight of. After her shift, as she changed out of her uniform in the staff bathroom, her manager knocked on the door. He handed her an envelope, his expression carefully neutral. "From the gentleman in the private room," was all he said. Inside was $500 in crisp bills that smelled new. But it was the other item that made her blood run cold. A plain white business card with 10 digits printed in simple black font. No name, no title, just numbers. And on the back, in handwriting that was surprisingly elegant, it said, "Some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. "Be careful, Susan." He knew her name. She'd never introduced herself. Her name tag had been turned inward, a habit from too many customers who thought first names granted them intimacy they hadn't earned. He knew her name, which meant he'd found it out, which meant he'd looked, which meant she was no longer invisible. The walk home was a journey through an alien city. The same streets she'd walked for 3 years suddenly felt unfamiliar, full of shadows that moved wrong, cars that slowed when they shouldn't. She'd been invisible. Now she was seen, and being seen, she was beginning to understand, could be the most dangerous thing in the world. Home is a sanctuary. But for Susan that night, her small 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor felt like a paper fortress. Walls so thin she could hear her neighbors arguing about money, children crying, televisions blaring competing sitcoms. She checked the lock 3 times, tested the chain, looked through the peephole at the empty hallway that suddenly seemed menacing. The $500 sat on her kitchen counter like evidence of a crime. Chloe slept in the next room, her breathing soft and even, utterly trusting that tomorrow would come safely. Susan sat in the dark, holding the business card, tracing the numbers with her thumb, and didn't sleep at all. For 2 days she jumped at shadows. The man at the bus stop who looked at her too long, the car that seemed to be behind her for 3 blocks, the phone that rang twice and went silent when she answered. She told herself it was paranoia, exhaustion, stress. She told herself nothing would happen. She told herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Then, on the 3rd day, her phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. Against her better judgment, she answered, "Susan Carter?" The voice was professional, clipped, authoritative. "This is Detective Miller with the Metropolitan Police. We need you to come in for questioning regarding an incident at the Gilded Plate restaurant." Her heart stopped. "An incident? Donald Reeves was found dead this morning. We have reason to believe you were one of the last people to see him alive. Leo Thorne provided your name as someone who served their table." The words didn't make sense. Dead. Police. Her name. She gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. "I don't understand. I just served them dinner. We just need to ask you a few questions. Can you come to the station at 3 o'clock? She hung up, her breath coming in short gasps. Donald was dead. The police wanted to question her. Leo had given them her name. She'd saved a man's life, and now she was being pulled into something she couldn't comprehend. With trembling fingers, she dug the business card from her wallet and dialed the 10 digits. He answered on the first ring. "Susan," he said, her name immediate. No hello, no preamble. His voice was different on the phone, more intimate, more urgent. "Breathe." That was not the police. "Donald is alive and in Toronto as of 6 hours ago. That call was a probe. Someone is confirming you're a problem. How did you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I've been monitoring your phone since that night. I apologize for the invasion of privacy, but I needed to know if they'd make contact. They just did." He paused, and she heard traffic in the background, voices. "They are already near you. The man in the gray beanie outside your building, the silver sedan parked across the street, those are my people. The threat against me has shifted to you. You saw something you shouldn't have, and now they know you're aware. Let me keep you and Chloe safe." As they spoke, her phone buzzed with another call. Mrs. Henderson from downstairs, her voice high and terrified. "Susan? There's a man at your door. He's knocking, saying he's looking for you. He knows your name. He tried the knob. I called through the door that you weren't home, but—" The line went dead. "They're at my apartment," Susan whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do not go home," Leo commanded, and she could hear him moving now, doors opening, orders being given to someone else. "Do not go anywhere familiar. There's a car pulling up to your location right now. Black SUV. The driver's name is Marcus. He'll show you identification. Go with him. Do you trust me?" It was the most insane question in the world. Trust a billionaire she'd met once, whose life she'd saved, who was now telling her that people were hunting her, that her home wasn't safe, that everything she knew had become dangerous. But she thought of the turning doorknob. She thought of Chloe at school, unprotected, vulnerable. She thought of the coldness in that fake detective's voice. "Get my daughter," she whispered. "Promise me you'll get my daughter." Marcus is already on his way to Chloe's school. I'll bring her to you myself. I promise you, Susan. I promise. An anonymous car took her to a towering glass building downtown, the kind with security desks and marble lobbies and elevators that required key cards. Marcus, a man built like a defensive lineman with kind eyes that didn't match his intimidating frame, led her to a penthouse on the 42nd floor, a vault with a view, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that glittered with 1,000 lights, each one representing a life she'd never touch, a world she'd never inhabit. The apartment was all clean lines and expensive simplicity, the kind of minimalism that costs a fortune to achieve. She stood in the center of the living room, afraid to touch anything, feeling like an artifact that had been transported from one museum to another. Soon, Marcus arrived with a wide-eyed Mrs. Henderson who kept apologizing for letting strangers into Susan's life, and a sleepy Chloe still wearing her school backpack, her eyes wide with confused excitement. "Mama, are we rich now?" Chloe asked, taking in the marble countertops and the chandelier that looked like it was made of captured moonlight. Before Susan could answer, before she could even begin to formulate a response that made sense, a voice came from the terrace. "Not rich, just safe." Leo Thorne stood in the doorway, backlit by the city, and he looked tired, human. The geological confidence had cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. He was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, his hair slightly mussed, his eyes red-rimmed. He knelt down to Chloe's level, and his smile was genuine. "Hi, Chloe. My name is Leo. Your mom did something very brave and some not very nice people are upset about it. So you're going to stay here for a little while where it's safe. Is that okay?" Chloe looked at her mother, then back at Leo, processing with the strange adaptability of children. "Do you have TV?" "I do, and about 17 streaming services I don't know how to use. Maybe you can teach me?" After Mrs. Henderson left with enough cash to ease her conscience, and Marcus settled Chloe in a guest room with more entertainment than she'd ever seen in her life, Susan and Leo stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island. The space between them felt charged with unspoken questions. When they were alone, the silence stretched for a moment too long. Then Leo laid out a choice, his voice carefully neutral, giving her the facts without pressure. "I can make you and Chloe disappear. I have people who specialize in this. New names, a new city, a new life. Clean documents, employment history, everything you need. You'd be safe, but you'd be starting over. Your nursing school dream would have to wait, but you'd be alive." Or he paused, watching her carefully. "You can help me finish this. You saw what others missed. You have a perspective that my entire security team doesn't have because you were invisible to them. Help me identify the conspiracy from the inside. Once it's done, the threat vanishes. You can have your life back. You can go to nursing school. I'll make sure of it." He was offering a deal with the devil. Invisibility, or walking into the heart of the storm. Safety or justice. Survival, or the chance to mean something. Susan looked through the window at the city below, at all those lights representing lives that went on, unaware, untouched by the violence that swirled in penthouses and private dining rooms. She thought of Chloe's drawing of her in a nurse's cap, taped to their refrigerator. She thought of the jar labeled someday. She thought of the feeling of Donald's hand passing over that wine glass, and Leo Thorne's trusting face, and the choice she'd made in 3 seconds that had brought her here. "What do I have to do?" Susan asked. Leo almost smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "You have to become visible." And so the invisible waitress became the billionaire's secret weapon. In the penthouse command center, a room Susan hadn't known existed behind a bookshelf that swung open like something from a spy movie, she found herself sitting across from Leo and 3 of his most trusted advisors. There were screens everywhere, displaying financial data, security camera feeds, encrypted communications. It looked like something from a thriller, except it was real, and she was in the middle of it. Susan profiled the vipers from her memory, reaching back to that night to details she hadn't known she'd observed. The human brain is extraordinary in crisis, capturing information that only reveals itself later, in safety, when there's time to process. She pointed out the man who laughed too loudly at Leo's jokes, the one whose eyes never matched his smile, who touched Leo's shoulder too familiarly. "That one," she said. "He was performing. Everything about him was calculated to appear loyal. The laugh came half a second too late, like he was remembering he was supposed to find it funny. "Richard Price," Leo confirmed, his jaw tightening. "My CFO. He stood to gain millions if I died. My shares would have been distributed according to a clause he helped draft 5 years ago." She identified the quiet man, the one who asked technical questions about market projections, whose questions seemed innocent but were actually probing for specific information. He wanted to know about overseas holdings. He asked 3 different times, rephrasing it each time like he was making conversation, but he was mapping assets. "Jonathan Briggs. He's been funneling assets through shell companies for 6 months. We've been tracking it but couldn't prove intent. You just confirmed his motive." But the third man, Robert Vance, silver-haired, distinguished, with a face made for confidence and trust, gave her the deepest chill. She remembered him sitting slightly apart, observing more than participating. He never touched his wine. Everyone else drank. He just swirled it, held it, but never brought it to his lips. He brought the bottle, didn't he? The 1985 Chateau Margaux. It was his gift. Leo went very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence or grief. A gift to celebrate closing the Henderson merger. From his private collection. He said it was special, that we should save it for the dinner with the key stakeholders. "He's the one," Susan said quietly. "He's in charge. The others are accomplices, but he's the architect. He orchestrated everything." The betrayal was a physical weight in the room. Robert Vance had been Leo's father's best friend, had been at Leo's college graduation, had been named Chloe's godfather in a will Leo had forgotten he'd signed years ago. The conspiracy was clear now, terrible in its elegant simplicity. Vance orchestrated, providing access and planning. Briggs funded through embezzled assets. Price manipulated board dynamics for the aftermath. And Donald was the expendable tool, probably promised money he'd never see, definitely unaware he'd been set up to take the fall. To draw them out, Leo needed to appear vulnerable. So he publicly launched a philanthropic foundation for single parents, citing personal inspiration from someone who showed me what true courage looks like. He made himself look distracted, emotional, unlike the calculated businessman they expected. He gave interviews where he seemed tired, contemplative, talking about meaning and purpose. To men like Vance, it would look like weakness, like grief, like Leo Thorne was coming apart at the seams. The counterstrike was swift and personal. A courier delivered a package to Susan. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny hand-knit replica of Chloe's favorite sweater, the blue one with the white stars that she wore every Wednesday. The stitching was perfect, made with care, which somehow made it more horrifying. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The message was clear. We know who she is. We know what she looks like. We know what she wears. We can reach her. Susan stormed into Leo's study, the tiny sweater clenched in her fist, fury and terror warring in her chest. "This is your plan? Using my child as bait? Making yourself look weak so they'll what? Come after us harder? Do you understand what this means? Do you think I wanted this?" he roared, his control finally shattering. He swept files off his desk, papers flying like wounded birds, pens scattering across hardwood. "I am trying to build something clean, something that matters, and that filth, that corruption, has now touched the one decent thing that has happened to me in a decade." "What are you talking about?" Susan demanded, her voice breaking. "You," he said, breathless, running his hands through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "You looked at me and saw a person, not an asset, not an opportunity, not a means to an end. A person worth saving even though it cost you everything. That kindness is a weapon they cannot comprehend. It's the only reason we can win. Because they don't understand it. They don't believe it exists. And that blindness is the crack in their armor." The anger transformed into something else, something fiercer and more desperate. An alliance forged not in trust but in necessity, tempered by shared outrage at the violation of innocence. "Okay," Susan said, her mind already racing ahead, already calculating. "Then we don't just make you look vulnerable. We make you look broken. We give Vance a show he can't resist. We let him think his intimidation worked. That I'm your new, crippling weakness. That you're so distracted by protecting me and Chloe that you've lost your edge." We make him so confident that he gets sloppy. That puts you directly in the line of fire, Leo said. I've been in the line of fire since I spilled that glass, Susan countered. The difference is now I'm shooting back. They would step fully into the light, together. No more hiding, no more waiting. They would become the bait and the trap simultaneously. The final play began at a glittering gala, one of those charity events where the wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity, while wearing jewelry that could fund schools. Leo arrived with Susan on his arm, and the room rippled with whispers. She was dressed in a gown that Leo's stylist had chosen, midnight blue silk that cost more than 3 months of her rent, her hair swept up in a way that made her look elegant and out of place simultaneously. They played the part perfectly, Leo as a man consumed by a new, fragile obsession, touching her elbow too often, his attention wandering from conversations to check on her, displaying all the signs of a man losing his focus. Susan as the waitress who'd stumbled into a world beyond her comprehension, overwhelmed, clingy, a weakness that could be exploited. Across the room, Robert Vance smiled, raising his glass in a toast to his perceived victory. He looked pleased, satisfied, like a chess player watching his opponent make exactly the move he'd anticipated. He made his way through the crowd, greeting old friends, accepting compliments, playing the role of loyal elder statesman with practiced ease. Later, in a private room away from the noise of the gala, Vance made his move. The room was smaller, more intimate, with just Leo, Susan, and Vance. He'd requested the meeting under the guise of discussing foundation business, but his intentions were written in the confidence of his posture. Given the distractions, Leo, perhaps it's time to let the old guard steer the ship for a while. You've been through so much, the attempt on your life, this new relationship. Take some time. Let those of us who've been doing this longer handle the complexities. I'm thinking of your welfare, son. Son. He used that word like a weapon disguised as affection. Susan spoke, her voice soft but clear, no longer playing the overwhelmed ingenue. Was it stability you were offering in the private dining room, Mr. Vance, when you brought the 1985 Chateau Margaux, the bottle from your personal collection? Vance's smile didn't falter, but something changed in his eyes, a calculation, a reassessment. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, my dear. I bring wine to many dinners. We had it tested, Leo said, and his voice had lost all pretense of weakness. It was the voice of boardrooms and hostile takeovers, sharp and merciless. The bottle and the glass you never drank from. The residue on the rim contained traces of your DNA, Robert. And the antidote you took before dinner? That was clever. We found the prescription filled under a false name. Donald was very talkative once Interpol froze his accounts. Turns out loyalty is expensive, and you stopped paying for it the moment you thought I was dead. You have nothing, Vance spat, the mask finally slipping. The word of a failed hitman and circumstantial evidence. Do you know who I am? What I can do? I built this company with your father. I built you. We have the courier who delivered the sweater, Susan said, stepping forward. He's been very forthcoming about the man who hired him, showed us security footage of their meetings. We have the financial trail from Briggs to your shell company in the Caymans, the one you thought was hidden under 6 layers of corporate structure. We have Price's recorded call about the board vote after Leo's tragic illness, discussing how you'd be appointed interim CEO. You taught Leo to find leverage, Robert. Your leverage was fear and loyalty and the assumption that no one would look at you. Ours is evidence. Every single piece admissible in court. The federal prosecutor is very interested. Leo tapped his phone. On the screen, a live feed showed federal agents arresting Price at his home, handcuffs glinting in the morning light. Another feed showed Briggs being led out of his office. A third showed Donald being escorted off a plane in Toronto by Interpol. Vance's face went through a fascinating transformation: disbelief, understanding, rage, and finally, defeat. As Marcus appeared at the door with 2 federal agents, as Vance's hands were bound and his rights were read, the mighty fell. The man who'd built empires became just another criminal in an expensive suit. As Vance was led away, shattered and diminished, it was over. 1 week later, Susan stood in the penthouse living room, her small suitcase by the door, Chloe's backpack slung over one shoulder. The glass jar labeled "Someday" sat on the counter, now containing significantly more than $243. Leo approached, holding an envelope, and his expression was carefully neutral. "The Susan Carter Grant for Single Parents in Nursing," he said, handing it to her. "It's fully endowed from the assets recovered from Vance and his conspirators. It's the clean money, the funds they'd stolen from pension accounts and employee benefits, redistributed to people who actually need it. The paperwork is done. The board approved it unanimously. Take it. Build the life you were meant to have." Inside the envelope was a full scholarship to the nursing program she'd researched late at night, the one she thought she'd never afford. Room and board, childcare stipend, living expenses, everything she needed to not just attend but to focus, to excel, to become the nurse she was meant to be. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a return on her courage, an investment in the moment she'd chosen to be visible. "Thank you, Susan," he said, extending his hand in a gesture that felt both formal and profound. "For the spilled glass, for everything after, for reminding me what this is all for." She took it, feeling the solid current of profound respect flowing between them, the acknowledgement of two people who'd seen each other clearly in moments of truth. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Not as a waitress, not as a problem, just as a person trying to do the right thing." "The world needs more people like you," Leo said. "People who spill the glass." Chloe appeared from the guest room, dragging her small roller suitcase decorated with unicorn stickers, her eyes bright with the resilience of children.
"Are we going home now, Mama? We're going somewhere even better, baby,"
Susan said, kneeling to her level.
"We're going to our new life."
And so, the storm passed. But what happens after is the real story, the one that unfolds in classrooms and hospital corridors, in quiet moments of choosing courage over comfort. Susan used the grant. She studied late into the night, balanced textbooks and Chloe's homework, learned anatomy and pharmacology and the delicate art of compassionate care. She excelled not because it was easy, but because she'd learned that hard things were worth doing. She graduated top of her class, her daughter in the audience beside Leo Thorne, both of them holding signs they'd made together that said Nurse Carter with glitter and pride. She became a pediatric nurse at County General, the hospital where she'd taken Chloe for every childhood illness, where she'd sat in waiting rooms counting pennies and praying for good news. Now she was on the other side, holding the hands of frightened parents, explaining procedures in language they could understand, being the kind of nurse she'd wished for in her own moments of fear. One evening, after a long shift full of small victories and necessary griefs, after she'd saved the life of a little boy who'd stopped breathing and brought comfort to a mother who'd lost her daughter, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Leo. "Saw the news. Top of your class. I knew you would be." She smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before typing. "The hospital is hiring a new ethics consultant. Someone to help navigate complex cases, protect patient rights, make sure the right thing gets done even when it's hard. Interested?" The reply was instant. "Only if my first consultant hires me." Chloe, now 10, framed a drawing for her one Saturday afternoon. It showed a tall man in a suit and a woman with a nurse's cap, standing over a small girl with pigtails. A giant spilled glass loomed in the background, water spreading like wings, but from it grew a beautiful, sprawling tree with branches that reached the edges of the paper. Each leaf was labeled with a word: courage, kindness, justice, hope, love. The title, in Chloe's increasingly steady handwriting, "How My Mom Changed the World." Susan Carter's life was saved over and over, in ways big and small, by her own stubborn heart that refused to look away, by a neighbor's kindness in calling a warning, by a billionaire's offer of a clean start, by teachers who stayed late to help Chloe with math, by the grant administrator who expedited her paperwork, by the nursing instructor who saw her potential and pushed her to excellence. She learned that a single act of courage is a stone hurled into the still surface of destiny. The ripples go out and out and out, touching shores you'll never see. That woman who helped her years ago, the stranger who'd paid for her groceries when her card was declined, never knew she saved 2 lives that day, gave Susan just enough hope to keep going one more week. Susan will never know how many lives she'll save as a nurse, How many children will grow up because she noticed something other people missed? Because she refused to be invisible. Leo learned that the greatest power isn't in control or wealth or influence, but in protecting the good when you find it, in recognizing courage and investing in it, in being the kind of person who sees the spilled glass for what it truly is, a moment of profound choice. They had all been invisible, until one moment, one choice, one spilled glass made them seen. And in being seen, they became real, consequential, part of the great web of human connection that holds the world together. So, we reach the end. Did this story make you believe in the ripple effect of kindness? If it did, please let me know in the comments. Tell me, Ripple, if you'll look for chances to spill the glass in your own life, to make the hard choice, to be visible when invisibility feels safer.